Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Phantom Orchestra Pit. Holly Arnold had been the artistic director of the Sandown Theatre for nearly 5 years, but she had never faced a challenge quite like this. The theatre, nestled on the Isle of Wight, had once been the pride of the island, its shows drawing crowds from far and wide. Now it was a crumbling relic, its grandeur reduced to dust and faded memories. The dwindling audiences, the peeling wallpaper, the musty smell of neglect. Holly had to fix it all. Her last hope rested on the revival of an old, abandoned tradition, the reopening of the orchestra pit. The pit had been sealed off decades ago after a tragic incident that had become the stuff of local legend. A fire had broken out during a performance, trapping the entire orchestra below the stage. Despite the audience's frantic efforts, the musicians perished in the inferno, their instruments reduced to ash. Since that night, no one had dared use the pit. Some claimed it was cursed, that the ghosts of the dead musicians lingered there, waiting to be heard again. But Holly was a rational woman. She didn't believe in ghosts or curses. She believed in talent, hard work, and maybe a little luck. With the theatre's finances in dire straits, she needed a miracle, and the reintroduction of live music, performed by a full orchestra, might just be that miracle. The local community was intrigued by the idea, and she knew it would draw a crowd if only to see the infamous pit reopened. The pit itself was a dark, gaping hole beneath the stage, its edges lined with faded velvet curtains. Dust clung to every surface, the air thick with the scent of decay. Holly had the area cleaned and refurbished, installing new lighting and fresh seats. Still, there was something unsettling about the space. The workers had complained of strange noises, whispers, distant notes of music, and a coldness that seemed to seep into their bones. Holly dismissed it as superstition, the result of too many ghost stories. The night of the reopening finally arrived. The theatre was packed, every seat filled with curious patrons eager to witness the spectacle. The musicians, a group of talented professionals from the mainland, were excited but nervous. They had all heard the stories, but like Holly, they didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. The lights dimmed, the audience hushed, and Holly took her place in the wings, her heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and hope. The conductor raised his baton, and the orchestra began to play. At first, everything was perfect. The music filled the theatre, rich and vibrant, and Holly felt a wave of relief. But then, something changed. The notes began to distort, warping into something eerie and unfamiliar. The musicians faltered, their eyes wide with confusion, but they continued to play, trying to regain control. The air in the theatre grew colder, and a low, haunting melody began to weave through the music, threading its way through the performance like a shadow. It was a sound that didn't belong, something ancient and mournful. Holly's breath caught in her throat as she watched, her hands clenched into fists. The audience was silent, their faces pale, as if they too could feel the shift, the wrongness in the air. And then Holly saw them. The ghostly figures appeared slowly, rising from the depths of the pit like smoke. Their forms were transparent, shimmering with an otherworldly light. They were dressed in the charred remnants of old-fashioned concert attire, their faces twisted in agony, their eyes hollow and dark. They held instruments in their hands, but they were not like any instruments Holly had ever seen, twisted, broken things that dripped with black, oily blood. The ghostly orchestra played on, their music mingling with the living musicians, creating a cacophony of sound that was both beautiful and terrifying. The living musicians couldn't stop. They were trapped in the music, their hands moving of their own accord, their eyes wide with fear. The conductor's baton moved on its own, guided by an unseen force, his face a mask of horror. Holly tried to scream, but no sound came out. She wanted to run, to flee the theatre, but her feet were rooted to the spot. The air was thick with the smell of burning flesh, the heat of the old fire creeping back into the room, searing her skin. The audience was in a trance, their eyes glazed over, their bodies swaying to the ghostly melody. Some of them began to hum along, their voices low and hollow, as if they too were being pulled into the music, becoming part of the haunting performance. Suddenly, the music swelled to a deafening crescendo, the ghostly musicians playing with a frenzied intensity. The living orchestra's instruments began to break, strings snapping, wood splintering, but still they played on, their fingers bleeding, their faces contorted in pain. And then, as quickly as it had started, the music stopped. The ghostly figures vanished, leaving only a lingering chill in the air. The living musicians slumped in their seats, their instruments falling from their hands, their faces pale and drawn. The audience remained silent, as if they were waking from a dream, their expressions dazed and confused. Holly stood frozen in the wings, her mind racing, trying to comprehend what had just happened. But before she could make sense of it, the applause began soft at first, then building into a thunderous roar. The audience rose to their feet, cheering and clapping, their faces alight with excitement. They thought it was all part of the show. Holly couldn't move, couldn't speak. She watched in horror as the musicians, their eyes wide with terror, were forced to take a bow. The conductor's hand shook as he turned to face the audience, his face ashen. But he smiled, a hollow, terrified smile, and the applause grew louder. Holly knew she should be relieved that the performance had been a success, that the theatre might be saved. But all she felt was a deep, bone-chilling dread. The ghostly orchestra had given them what they wanted, an unforgettable performance, but at what cost? As the audience filed out, chattering excitedly about the incredible show, Holly finally found the strength to move. She walked slowly onto the stage, her legs trembling, and peered down into the pit. It was empty, as if nothing had happened, but the air was still cold, the smell of burning flesh lingering in her nostrils. She knew then that the stories were true. The pit was cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who had died there, their souls trapped in an endless cycle of music and fire. And now they had found a way to play again, to be heard once more. But Holly also knew that this was only the beginning. The theatre might be saved, but it would never be free. The ghostly musicians would return, night after night, drawn to the music, to the audience, to the life they could never have again. And each time, the line between the living and the dead would blur a little more, until there was no distinction at all. As Holly stood there, staring into the dark, empty pit, she felt a cold hand brush against her own. She gasped, jerking her hand back, but there was nothing there, only the echo of a distant, haunting melody, drifting up from the depths. And Holly knew that the Phantom Orchestra would play on, long after the living had gone. Forever. Holly Arnold became the artistic director of the Sandown Theatre 5 years ago, hoping to restore its former glory. But after reopening the abandoned orchestra pit, she discovered that some things are better left undisturbed. Now the theatre is saved, but at a terrible cost. The ghostly musicians who died in the tragic fire a decade ago have returned, and they are not ready to stop playing. As the line between the living and the dead fades, Holly realizes that the Sandown Theatre will never be the same again. Holly's life became a waking nightmare after that fateful night. The theatre, once a place of dreams and escape, was now a prison of dark memories and creeping dread. She tried to move on, to focus on the theatre's newfound success. The local press hailed the performance as a stroke of genius, an avant-garde masterpiece that defied explanation. Tickets sold out weeks in advance, and the theatre was suddenly alive with energy and excitement. But Holly knew the truth. She had seen the terror in the musicians' eyes, felt the chill of the ghost's presence. The orchestra pit was cursed, and it had become a doorway to something far darker than she had ever imagined. Every night she would stand in the wings, her heart pounding, waiting for the inevitable, knowing the Phantom Orchestra would return. And return they did. Each performance, the music would start normally, but it wouldn't be long before the strange, otherworldly melody began to creep in, twisting the beautiful harmonies into something sinister. The audience remained captivated, blissfully unaware that they were witnessing something far more dangerous than mere art. The musicians, however, were not so fortunate. They began to change, their faces growing more gaunt, their eyes hollow. They spoke less and less, their conversations haunted by fearful glances and whispered doubts. Some of them tried to quit, but something always brought them back, an unshakable compulsion, as if they were bound to the theatre by an invisible chain. Holly saw the desperation in their faces, but she was powerless to help them. One night, after another chilling performance, Holly found herself alone in the theatre. The crew had long since gone home, leaving her to her thoughts. She wandered through the empty aisles, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The theater, once her sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. She paused at the edge of the stage, looking down into the orchestra pit. The darkness below seemed to pulse, alive with a malevolent energy. She felt a familiar coldness seep into her bones, and for a moment she thought she heard the faint strains of music drifting up from the shadows. "You shouldn't be here alone," the voice startled her. It was Martin, the principal violinist. He looked even more haggard than the last time she had seen him, his skin pale and clammy, dark circles under his eyes. "Martin," Holly said. "What are you doing here? I could ask you the same," he replied. His eyes flicked nervously towards the pit. "It's dangerous, Holly. You know that?" Holly nodded. "I do, but I don't know what to do. The theater. It's not just haunted, Martin. It's alive, and it's hungry. We all feel it. It's like the music has a life of its own, something dark and ancient. Every time we play, it takes a little more from us. I don't know how much longer we can keep doing this." Holly looked at him. "I'm sorry, Martin. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to save the theater. It's not your fault," Martin said. "Oh, but we have to do something, before it's too late." But what could they do? The pit had been reopened, the door to the other side thrown wide. The ghosts had returned, and they weren't going to leave willingly. "There might be a way," Martin said quietly. "An exorcism, or something like it. We need to find a way to close the pit, to seal it off for good. Otherwise, they'll keep coming back. They'll never stop." Holly swallowed hard. "An exorcism, but who? How? I don't know. But we have to try. We can't go on like this." She had to do something. She couldn't let the theater, her dream, become a gateway to hell. But she also knew they were dealing with forces beyond their understanding, forces that had already claimed countless lives. "I'll find a way," Holly promised. "I'll do whatever it takes," Martin nodded. "Just be careful, Holly. Whatever this is, it's powerful, and it doesn't want to be stopped." As he left, Holly stood alone in the darkened theater. The air around her seemed to hum with unseen energy, a whispering malevolence that sent shivers down her spine. She knew she was being watched, that something in the darkness below was waiting for her to make a move. The next few days were a blur of research and frantic phone calls. Holly scoured the island for anyone who might know something about the supernatural, anyone who could help her close the pit. She visited old bookstores, spoke with local historians, and even sought out the reclusive old woman known as the Witch of Ventnor, who lived in a crumbling cottage on the edge of the island. But no one could offer a solution. The pit, they said, was a wound in the fabric of reality, a scar left by the tragic fire that had claimed the lives of the original orchestra. The ghosts were drawn to it, bound to it by the pain and suffering of their deaths. The fire had opened a doorway, and now that it was open, it couldn't be closed not by any ordinary means. Holly felt her hope slipping away, replaced by a growing sense of dread. Every night the performances continued, and every night the Phantom Orchestra played on, their haunting melodies seeping into the minds of the living, binding them to the theater. The musicians were becoming more like the ghosts with each passing day, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. The audience, too, seemed to change, their expressions growing vacant, their movements slow and dreamlike. It was as if the entire theater was falling under a spell, a dark enchantment that drained the life from all who entered. Holly knew she had to act before it was too late, but she felt powerless, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. One night, after yet another disturbing performance, Holly returned to the theater long after everyone else had left. She had made a decision, a desperate, last-ditch effort to save the theater and the people trapped within its walls. She had found an old ritual, hidden in the pages of a dusty tome she had discovered in the back of an antique shop. The ritual was said to banish spirits, to close the doors between worlds. It was risky, dangerous even, but Holly had no other choice. She couldn't let the pit remain open. She couldn't let the ghosts win. Armed with nothing but a few hastily gathered supplies, a bundle of sage, a vial of salt, and a tattered page with the ritual's instructions, Holly made her way to the edge of the pit. The theater was deathly silent, the only sound her own ragged breathing. She knelt at the edge, her hands trembling as she prepared to begin. But before she could start, she felt a cold, icy hand grip her shoulder. She gasped, spinning around, but there was no one there. Only the dark, empty theater and the pit yawning below. A whispering voice filled her mind, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Asterisk, you cannot stop us. Asterisk, it said, the words dripping with malice. Asterisk, we will play on forever. Asterisk, Holly shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. She had to focus. She had to finish the ritual. But the cold grip on her shoulder tightened, and she felt herself being pulled towards the pit, towards the darkness below. No, she screamed. I won't let you. With a burst of strength born of sheer terror, Holly broke free and began the ritual. The air around her seemed to thicken, growing heavier, darker, as if the very walls of the theatre were closing in. The whispering grew louder, more frantic, as the spirits fought against her. But Holly pushed on, her voice rising above the din. She sprinkled the salt around the edge of the pit, waving the bundle of sage through the air, her heart pounding in her chest. The darkness seemed to pulse, a living, breathing entity, but she refused to stop. She couldn't stop. Finally, with one last desperate cry, she finished the ritual. There was a moment of silence, a brief, terrifying pause, and then the air around her exploded with a deafening roar. The pit erupted in a blinding flash of light, the darkness screaming as it was torn apart, pulled back into the void from which it had come. Holly was thrown backward, landing hard on the stage. She lay there, gasping for breath, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The light faded, and the theatre was plunged into darkness once more. But the pit was silent. Holly struggled to her feet, her body aching, and peered down into the pit. It was empty, truly empty this time. The air was still, the oppressive coldness gone. The ghosts were gone. She had done it. She had closed the pit. But as Holly stood there, staring into the dark, she thanked you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.